I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as the world awaits what some say could be the most consequential summit for Europe since the end of the Second World War, we hear the latest updates live from Alaska, from journalists, experts and protesters gathering there. Plus, we assess the fast-moving situation on the battlefield and provide our regular update on the occupied territories.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We are strong. We are Ukrainians.
It's Friday, the 15th of August, 3 years and 174 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, dialing in from Alaska, I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls. And also dialing in from abroad, Dr. Jade McGlynn of King's College London. But first, the major developments of the past 24 hours. Trump will not make a deal with Putin on peace in Ukraine without Zelensky. So claimed the US president yesterday as we prepare for the historic summit in Alaska, where dignitaries are arriving for the first face-to-face between US and Russian leaders since the invasion. Speaking to Fox News, Trump said he thought Putin would make a deal, but that it would not come until he met with the Ukrainian president. I believe now Putin's convinced that he's going to make a deal, Trump said, and we're going to find out. I'm going to find out very quickly. The second meeting is going to be very, very important because that's going to be the meeting where they make a deal. And I don't want to use the word divvy things up, but to a certain extent, it's not a bad term. Trump said his goal is to move forward a trilateral meeting with Zelensky and Putin, noting that 3 different locations were under consideration, including Alaska. He estimated that there was a 1 in 4 chance this summit would end in failure and said he was open to imposing further sanctions on Russia if the talks don't lead to peace. He said, I would do that, yeah, if it's not solved. I am president and he's not going to mess around with me. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the president's hope is to achieve some stoppage of fighting so that those conversations about peace can happen. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has just arrived in Alaska wearing a USSR jumper. Hardly subtle, in a nod, of course, to the Cold War, Russia's former stature, and to Kyiv's former Soviet past. He told reporters he was not making any predictions on the outcome of talks. We know that we have our arguments and our position is clear and unambiguous. We will present it, he said. The Europeans continue to stress Ukraine has an effective veto on whatever Trump and Putin decide. British Defence Secretary John Healey said it is for President Zelensky and the Ukrainians to determine the end to the fighting and the terms in which that takes place. Poland's Donald Tusk has just posted this. August 15th is a good day for talks with Russia about war and peace. On this day, 105 years ago, during the Battle of Warsaw, Poles stopped the Red Army in its march on Europe. Luckily, we didn't know that Russia is invincible, and we beat them. Peace through strength, nothing else. Pope Leo has also joined those calls for a pause in fighting. We must always seek a ceasefire, he said. The violence, the many deaths must stop. Let's see how they can come to an agreement, because after all this time, what is the purpose of war? We must always seek dialogue, diplomatic efforts, not violence, not weapons. Experts this morning are speculating about the Russian strategy. Sir John Sawyers, the former head of MI6, says he believes Putin will try and persuade Trump that Russia has a right to Ukraine and that one of the big risks is Trump is drawn into Putin's way of thinking. He told Sky News, I think Putin wants to persuade him the war will inevitably end in Russian victory and that President Trump should distance himself from Kyiv and the Europeans. They're also going to discuss US-Russia relations, and I think that might be a complicating factor for the Ukrainians. That is an important point. As we discussed yesterday, the Russian delegation includes very senior figures from across the Russian government. Some speculate that Putin will try everything in his power to make the Alaska summit about topics other than Ukraine. Strategic nuclear weapons reduction talks, something he referenced yesterday, Arctic cooperation, joint energy projects, minerals. In other words, emphasising the so-called beneficial opportunities for the US of a deal and closer cooperation. In classic Russian fashion, though, Putin has also been preparing to test a new nuclear-armed cruise missile ahead of this meeting. Satellite images show an increase in personnel and equipment at one of the Russian test sites, and a Western security source said that Russia was preparing to test a Burevestnik missile, which Moscow claims has unlimited range. On the front lines in Ukraine, Russia has been racing to seize as much territory as possible ahead of these talks. After those Russian sabotage and reconnaissance units punched through exposed defences near Dobrapilya, slipping as far as 6 miles behind the front line in just 48 hours, Kyiv has since diverted special forces units to confront the insurgents on the ground in an attempt to prevent any more of Ukraine falling under Russian control. As discussed yesterday, reports from the ground suggest the front line has now stabilised, with Russian forces yet to consolidate any of their gains. To quote the ISW, Russian forces have yet to reinforce and consolidate positions east and northeast of Dobrapilya, and Ukrainian and Russian sources report that Ukrainian reinforcements are stabilising the situation. Russian mill bloggers acknowledge that Ukrainian reserves are counterattacking, have started to stabilise the situation, and pushed Russian forces back slightly in unspecified areas of penetration. Other Russian mill bloggers continue to urge caution to their Russian audience about unconfirmed claims of Russian advances and emphasise that it remains unclear if Russian forces have been able to consolidate positions. ISW continues to assess that Russian forces do not control the territory east and northeast of Dobrapilya. ISW's assessed Russian advances map layer does not differentiate between enduring Russian positions and limited infiltration missions. Meanwhile, drones have been exchanged by both sides, with Kyiv seemingly having more success as they did yesterday. They say they struck a Russian port in the Astrakhan region, hitting a ship containing drone parts and ammunition sent from Iran. They also hit the Sizran refinery in Samara and a command post of Russia's 132nd Separate Motorized Brigade in occupied Donetsk. Russia says a civilian was wounded in occupied Luhansk and that 2 apartment blocks were destroyed and 4 others damaged in a drone attack on Lysychansk. In Russia's Ryazan region, authorities say at least 5 have been killed in an explosion at the gunpowder plant, and others are still under the rubble. A gas station was hit by Russia in Sumy this morning. A driver was injured when a drone hit his car. It seems that Moscow lost a fighter jet while conducting a mission southeast of Snake Island. According to the Ukrainian Navy, intelligence-intercepted radio communications indicate the loss of contact with the aircraft, and Russian forces have launched a search and rescue mission, with debris reportedly spotted on the sea surface. The pilots remain missing. Lastly, another prisoner exchange has taken place. 84 soldiers and civilians from Russian captivity returned to Ukraine yesterday. President Zelensky said among the civilians released today are those who have been held by the Russians since 2014, 2016 and 2017, including, as well, defenders from Mariupol. Almost all of them require medical care, he added. So that's the context as we approach Anchorage, as the historian Sergei Rodchenko writes today. The circumstances, the timing, even the location of the summit in an exotic a place as Alaska adds to the sense of fascination. But the journey to the summit is hard. The air is thin, the route is treacherous, and the view at the top is often obscured by dense clouds. A powerful analogy, but no reference there to a Winnebago. So let's rectify that now and go to Dom in his motorhome in Alaska. Dom, I hope you can hear me okay. What is the mood there?
Hello, everybody. Can you hit me okay? So it's just after 4 o'clock in the morning here. We are going to do this. Obviously, delighted to get up very early to talk to you. We're then going to head straight off after this, myself and the lovely Connor lying next to me here on the double bed at the back of the Winnebago. We've got to be in position to transfer to the White House press pool for, well, I can't actually remember the time, but it's so ugly. I think it was, in the words of Spike Milligan, a time invented by Hitler to win the war. So we're going to head in after this. We've then got hours of waiting around. We're going to go through all sorts of security and all that kind of jazz. We're going to get onto the air base near here, near Anchorage, just north of Anchorage. And then we're going to wait for, oh God, I think it's going to be like 4 hours or something before 11:30 our time. So that's going to be what, 8:30, 20:30, 8:30 in the evening, London time. Oh God, do the maths. 3, something like that. Anyway, we're expecting Donald Trump. We're expecting a kind of press pack for when Donald Trump meets Vladimir Putin. That will be the sort of handshake and the glad hand and what have you. And we are not expecting to be able to ask any questions at that point. They're going to head off, do their thing. We're told there'll be a working lunch. And then at around about, we think, early afternoon, possibly 3 o'clock, 1500 local time here in Alaska, so midnight London time, we're expecting a press conference. Now, whether that is both, we do not know. We're expecting it's just going to be Donald Trump. If Vladimir Putin is there as well, that will be very interesting. We will, of course, try and ask questions to Putin. I doubt he'll answer to any great satisfaction. But we, of course, will try. That's what you want us to do, and so we will. That's the day panning out for us. A lot of waiting around, very military, actually. Hurry up and wait, I think, is going to be the sort of mode of the day today. But no, life is all right here. Actually, we're getting on okay. The Bago absolutely came into its own yesterday, confirming yet again my genius booking this thing, because we're speaking to a lot of our colleagues in the international press in the White House press center that's been set up here, and everyone's just exhausted. As I said yesterday, there's no hotels around here, so everyone's being put up miles away in pretty ramshackle places that don't sound very salubrious, and everyone's pretty exhausted. But Connor and I, we are the proverbial fresh daisies. We went to a rally yesterday in support of Ukraine. I think we've got a report running on the front of the website, the Telegraph website at the moment. You can have a look at that. We spoke to some fascinating people there, and we also spoke to Charlie the dog. Charlie the dog, the most politicized dog in North America. He was wearing a sign, a sort of jacket saying, "I can shit a better president." Not entirely sure what he's got against Vladimir Putin. I presume that's who he was talking about. But yeah, Charlie, the very politicized dog, was there. We had a chat to him. He didn't say a lot. He was feeling a bit rough. Come on, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, we then had a great chat with Ostap Yarysh, who used to be a journalist with Voice of America. He now works for Razom for Ukraine, the non-profit advocacy group. He's very interesting. His view. He's fairly sceptical about today. Doesn't think much at all is going to come out of it, and actually worries about the optics of Putin just meeting Donald Trump here on US soil and glad handing and all the things that we expect. These sort of professional diplomatic courtesies will only play for Putin. I mean, I happen to share that view. Very unlikely there'll be any kind of diplomatic falling out or anything like that. For example, Donald Trump is known, he's famous for doing this sort of handshake thing when he greets other people. He shakes their hand and then instantly sort of pulls, tugs them towards him as a sort of show of strength. I guess if they look off balance, it's not a great look. I don't know why he does it, but anyway, we're going to watch out to see if he tries that trick with Vladimir Putin today. But yeah, so we went to the rally yesterday afternoon, and we got there a couple of hours early. Just parked up in this enormous, great parking lot next to where the rally was taking place. So we're feeling quite chipper actually, even though it's, what have you got me up at for us? It's 4:17 in the morning now, but we're looking okay. We're in good shape. I'm nervously checking the levels on the tanks. The somewhat inaccurately black water tank, and I apologize if you're having your lunch or your breakfast, but it would be more correctly called the brown water tank. That's only got about a third capacity left, so I'm going to have to get these sort of industrial strength Marigold gloves on and have a go at that. A task complicated by the elk burger that Connor had for dinner a couple of nights ago. That still, it feels like a third member of the team in the Winnebago, the elk that produced that thing. But anyway, so I've got the black water to look forward to. What else have we got? News of our Winnebago adventures has spread far and wide. I've got an interview with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation later on. They messaged me to say, "Is it true that you're there driving around in a Winnebago?" And I said, "Yeah, but probably the Putin-Trump summit is the bigger piece of news, but if you want us to dial in and talk about life in a 26-foot motorhome, I'm very happy to do that. We are down to our last dribble of milk, although we did treat some guests yesterday when we were interviewing them here in the Bago to a proper British cup of tea, which is why we're down so low. But otherwise, we're looking good. We'll finish up here, Francis, and then we're just going to head straight into the airbase and start the big wait.
Well, thanks, Tom. Before we hear your dispatch from the protest and your interview, I'm delighted now for us to be joined again by Dr. Jade McGlynn for our latest fortnightly segment on the occupied territories. Jade, welcome back. We're going to look at what Moscow has done with resources acquired illegally from those territories, something with ramifications for some of the conversations taking place later today. But first, I have to ask you, what are your feelings as we enter Alaska?
It's clearly and understandably a media circus, but I'm sceptical that anything substantive will come out of it. Ukraine isn't there. And that's not to say that some sorts of deals might not come out of it, but there's a difference between a deal and an agreement. An agreement takes time, it takes details, it takes energy, and it certainly takes all involved parties being there. Whereas, different random deals, they can be announced on the fly and forgotten by the next day.
And with Ukraine not there, of course, you can't have an agreement.
No.
It's a pretty important, fundamental thing that in order for parties to reach a conclusion on something, everybody has to actually be at the table. Let's turn to the subject that you want to focus on today, which is, as I said, ports and exports. Where do you want to start on this, Jade?
Yes, thank you for letting me talk about this, because I appreciate that it could sound a little bit niche, but I think it's part of what I want to do in terms of kind of bringing us some colour and texture to what is happening in the occupied territories. We have pretty detailed understanding of how the ports are working. In general, they're not really working for civilian logistics. They're mainly for military logistics. But one aspect that I really want to talk about is the expropriation of grain that happens through the occupied territories. So to provide a sort of broad overview, what we can see is just a multimodal theft architecture across Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, Crimea, and increasingly efforts to bring it into the Kherson coast, so Skadovsk, Henichesk, etc. And you have control over these ports is entirely mediated by shell companies and by customs tweaks, and they route grain and increasingly now as well minerals. We know that minerals are of interest to some rather well-known Americans who may or may not be in the media today. And they go through these sort of dual-use ports like Berdyansk or others in the occupied territories. And because it's all done through shell companies, the real beneficiaries are hidden. I can go through the sort of companies, but they're very, Region, Capstroj, Impexton, they're not really going to mean anything. I think to get to the point, what's interesting is we see a lot of political competition between when you start to dig into who the shell companies belong to. You see there's real political competition that goes right back up into the Kremlin. So between Mariat Husnulin, who's one of the deputy prime ministers, because why have one deputy prime minister when you can have several in Russia? And then his rival, Sergei Kirienko, who's the head of the presidential administration, a very busy and influential man. When he's not exporting stolen grain, he's helping to kidnap or militarize children. And he's very close to GRU. So you have these two camps, the Husnulin camp and the Kirienko GRU camps. They sort of shape which commodity is moving where, but the outcome is pretty constant. So we see an acceleration of resource expropriation in ways that are very, very convoluted. I thought that one element might be interesting to look at would be maybe some of the volumes and the destinations. If we look at Russian-occupied Kherson, in 2024, 324,000 tons of grain going to Turkey, 78,000 going to Egypt, 69,000 tons going to Syria, as well as smaller flows to Venezuela, Bangladesh, Libya, Tunisia, barley going to Serbia, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia, and 235 tons of sunflower oil going to Israel. Also see quite a fair smaller amounts, but amounts going to China. From Zaporizhia, where there's sort of 50 wagons, I feel like that's not the right word, like containers going a week, and you have this sort of huge monopoly that is called the State Grain operator, and it's a really interesting monopoly that people should look into, because the sort of money they're burning through would suggest it's a wallet not just for the occupied territories but for somebody much higher up. When you dig into the shell companies there to Mars Provenance, we see that they are sending grain both to Turkey and Spain, which is interesting, obviously, on Spain. There's plausible deniability because there's so many shell companies. But if I can find it out, I'm sure the entire government of Spain, if they really wanted to, could probably work it out. I mean, one of the things that's also interesting is not just the stuff you find, but the stuff you don't find. So a lot of the information that we found, and I should say thank you here to the Centre for Occupation Studies, it's actually correlates quite closely to a list given to TASS, so Russian state media, by a Russian official by the name of Sehuta. But what's interesting is that in his list, no rapeseed is mentioned. And that may sound really niche, but that's interesting because, I mean, it's quite a typical crop mix, and it must mean that they're really trying to hide it. So inevitably, we're currently working on trying to work out who is buying the rapeseed. I mean, rapeseed is not dual use. It could be used, I suppose, in some areas, like for cleaning equipment. But more broadly, it suggests that perhaps this is a very, whoever owns or controls the rapeseed exports is somebody whom they really want to protect. That's normally what it means. I mean, more broadly, in terms of the ports, we've seen just on the 1st of August, there was an auction putting the Yalta and Yevpatoria, so in occupied Crimea, they were put up for sale, 100% shares. And in general, obviously, that's not going to be a fair sale. It's just patronage, kind of asset shuffling, because they're minimally commercially viable because of sanctions and high kind of war risk insurance. And we're seeing quite a lot of other aspects. But very broadly, most of these ports are operating hugely under capacity. Russia and the occupied territories had a very bad harvest, and yet still they're managing to make incredible amounts of money out of it. There was a good report on stolen grain recently, but it's an area that's not always covered. I always find it quite an emotional topic just because of the history of the Holodomor, which obviously was so prevalent in eastern Ukraine. And just the idea, lots of people in the occupied territories, they are hungry. Lots of people are not able to access good food or indeed much food. And I don't know, just the horrible, horrible parallels of them exporting this grain and selling it just like they did in the 1930s. Although in this case as well, I mean, I suppose in that case too, there were clearly political benefits to the USSR. But in this case, some quite select individuals are getting very, very rich on it as well. And we really don't learn anything from history.
Well, it underscores that we're not just talking about Russian oil and gas in world trade. This is another really important aspect of it, and I'm glad that we've been able to raise attention to it today, given the context of events in Alaska and some of the conversations we understand are due to take place there. Are there any other updates relating to the occupied territories that you'd like to relay, Jade?
Yes, of course. I'd just like to, as always, kind of discuss what's been happening in terms of the resistance. Essentially, what we've been seeing over the last month or so has been a real crackdown across the occupied territories. We've inevitably, therefore, seen like a drop. However, this week, it would appear the resistance are back with a vengeance. In Kherson, for example, so particularly across the 1st to the 4th of August, we saw 7 different violent resistance acts. So 2 of them were in occupied Kherson. The first one was an attack, sabotage against energy system that was used for the occupiers, and the second was destroying military equipment, so armoured vehicles. Oh, it's one of these words because I only ever use it. Thank the Lord we don't have this problem in England of a Russian invasion. Some words, because I only use them in Ukrainian or Russian. Military words, I actually sometimes don't know how to say them in English because I just never need them. In Melitopol, on the 2nd of August, there was an assassination of several Russian military figures, some of whom were Russian agents or collaborators. In Mariupol, on the 3rd of August, there was destruction of a comms tower, like a mobile network. And then, of course, we had a number of, particularly by Atesh, who like to destroy railways. So Atesh also destroyed a railway connection point on the 3rd of August, and that was in a small settlement really in Zaporizhia region. And right now the Russians are really, everybody is understandably very focused on Pokrovsk, Dobrotylya, but there has been signs of the Russians trying to move some equipment. They're hyping up how much equipment they're actually moving, but they are moving some equipment through Zaporizhia ahead of, starting an offensive there as well. So very important work that the resistance is getting up to. A few other cases, again, the Kadyrovites are not having a good time in the occupied territories. 4 more of them were assassinated in Kirillivka in Zaporizhia region on the 9th of August, as well as a couple of other railway sabotage attacks, again in Zaporizhia. For example, on the 7th of August, we also saw an attack on a Russian military vehicle as well on the 13th of August. So in total there were 12 violent resistance actions. In terms of some of the non-violent, to be honest with you, a lot of that is still just efforts to destroy different parts of railways. So we're increasingly not seeing such a distinction. Again, just a reminder that the vast majority of the non-violent resistance, and indeed I would even say 99, probably up to 99% of the resistance in the occupied territories is people just sending coordinates on their phone, sending photos on their phone, hopefully on a secure, safe second phone that is in no way linked to their personal phone, and which is not by them all of the time. But that's the vast majority of the resistance. Clearly, those people operate in secrecy, often, from their own friends and family. If you get to a point where the people who are blowing stuff up, these are professionals or people who have become professionals over time, but we also shouldn't forget about all of those many, many, many thousands of people who, are not doing anything as dramatic as blowing something up, but are sending really helpful and useful information that still gets things blown up.
Well, Jade, it's always fascinating to hear your reporting and insights on the subject of the occupied territory. So thank you very much for your time today. And of course, we wait and see the outcome of events later on and over the weekend and the potential ramifications for some of the subjects that we've talked about. And now let's hear Dom's dispatch, an interview from Alaska.
In 1867, US Secretary of State William H. Seward bought the land of Alaska from Russia for the price of less than 2 cents an acre. Today, a crowd of about 300 people have come here to rally in support of Ukraine ahead of the talks by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Why is it important for you to come here today?
To show solidarity. I think it's horrible having a war criminal and a felon deciding what happens to Ukraine. If Putin wants peace in Ukraine, all he has to do is stop attacking. So he's not genuine.
Do you not think it shows willing that he's actually come here with a team? He's prepared to sit down and talk to the President of the United States?
No, I don't think so. I think he feels like he can manipulate Trump to do anything he wants.
I think it's important to support our allies, the people who stand up against aggression. And I think that, more importantly, civilized nations should not reward military aggression.
How important do you think it is that Ukraine is included in whatever Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are going to talk about tomorrow?
It's vital. It's Ukraine's country. It's not ours. It's not the United States. So I think that President Zelensky should be here.
What would be a good scenario from it for you?
I mean, ideally, a great scenario would be if Putin decides to end the war and withdraw from the territory of Ukraine. Do I think that's a realistic situation? Not very much. So, I mean, maybe the best scenario I can really hope for is some sort of temporary ceasefire.
How does it make you feel that Donald Trump may do some kind of deal with Vladimir Putin about access to minerals in Alaska?
It makes me sick, that I don't want... we don't have enough resources here for ourselves, but we rely on governmental help because we don't have enough sources.
What do you think is going to happen in these talks tomorrow between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump?
I don't think anything's going to happen. I think they're going to pat each other on the back and say, job well done.
Well, I'm delighted now to introduce to the Telegraph Winnebago studio Ostap Yarysh, who used to work for the Voice of America and now works for Razom for Ukraine, a non-profit. Ostap, welcome to the Bago.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a great space you have here.
It's lovely. It's lovely, isn't it? Apart from the snoring.
Absolutely.
Present company excluded, Connor. Now, we're speaking before Vladimir Putin has his meeting with Donald Trump, peace summit, peace negotiations, who knows what it is. I will ask you what you think it is in a moment. But can I ask, who wins by this summit happening at all?
So I think that definitely Putin thinks for himself that's a huge win. Huge win not just for him coming to the United States soil, but coming to Alaska. For him, this holds significant weight, symbolic weight. I think that for him coming to Alaska is even better than coming to Washington, D.C. because of this historical fantasies and his feelings that he and his circle still have towards Alaska. They still think it's Russian land. They have those billboards in Russia. And obviously, for him coming to Alaska, which used to be Russian, and then there's this idea of trading lands, swapping lands, all this, for him, this is, I think, the best thing. So in his mind, of course, he's a winner. President Trump, he thinks he's winning here because he doesn't have to go to foreign states. He doesn't have to go to, I don't know, Middle East or Switzerland or Hungary to meet with Putin. He can welcome him on the U.S. soil. Ukraine, on the other hand, of course, loses from not being present at the table, not having its voice. Obviously, there was a lot of pushback from European allies or from Ukraine. They were saying that, okay, since we're not present, nothing should be decided about Ukraine without Ukraine. And we've heard something from President Trump, right, when he said that, well, territorial concessions will not be discussed with Putin without Ukraine. That it will be up to Ukraine to make those decisions. That he might be open to some security guarantees. We've heard that as well. We'll see what comes out of the summit, right? So for now, Putin, in his mind, coming here definitely is a winner, meeting U.S. president for first time in how many years, visiting U.S. for 10 years more, especially Alaska. So let's see if he comes back as winner again.
From this summit, what do you think the best case outcome, realistic best case outcome is for Ukraine?
So for Ukraine, the best case outcome is President Trump walking out of the meeting and saying he talked to Putin and he did not get any meaningful promises or guarantees. He sees that Putin doesn't want to stop the war, obviously, and he will either impose sanctions on Russia or significantly arm Ukraine with right air defenses. So obviously that's an ideal, the perfect outcome. From what we heard, looks like President is determined to have the second meeting, right? But I think what would be great for him, and he said that he wants to do that. He wants to look Putin in his eyes to see what he's all about, and for him to see who Putin actually is. We've heard a lot of talk from President Trump before that he had those phone calls, and they were great phone calls, but he was disappointed afterwards because Putin, kept bombing Ukraine. Now he gets to meet him in person. Not the first time, they met before, but first time during his second term. If he truly sees that evil in Putin's eyes, in his soul, if he truly sees who Putin is, and then comes to Washington, D.C. with those impressions and moves them into policy decisions, real actions, I think that would be great.
Now, Vladimir Putin is a wily negotiator. Donald Trump sees himself as such as well. In recent days, they had the deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So Donald Trump's tail is high. He feels like he is on a roll. He said this morning that he's solved 6 wars in
5. Ukraine, if he solves Russia's war against Ukraine, that would be 6, I think.
Oh, I thought he said that he had solved 6.
Maybe, yeah.
But these are quite staggering numbers. But he feels as if momentum is on his side. So he's going into these negotiations or whatever they're going to be, feeling quite bullish. But what traps do you think Vladimir Putin will lay for him, or could lay for him?
We've seen that before, like Putin's delay tactics, or like flattering. I think Putin will try to, appeal to Donald Trump from this position of great Russian leader. Probably he's going to talk about history, about common history, and he talked about that before, how Russia is great, how America is great, and how 2 leaders can be great. together. So I think he will try to, use this approach of trying to impress President Trump. So obviously he will probably try to give him something for Donald Trump not to feel disappointed that he came all over to Alaska and returned back with nothing. So probably he will try to lay on the table some proposals that will look like peace proposals or something, but in fact would be beneficial to Russia only, right? Or he would do some small concessions.
What might that look like?
He would say that, well, we can agree to temporary ceasefire. That would just lead Russia to rearm, regroup, and then attack again in 10 days, 30 days, 3 months, right? He may say that, we agree to partial ceasefire. That will also lead to we'll give Russia time to regroup, get some rest militarily, and then attack Ukraine again on the battlefield. So I think that might be one of the strategies. Maybe he'll bring some presents to President Trump. Some special from Moscow, portraits, or other pieces, unique pieces that he'll present as great Russian culture is special for you, President, with all respect. Trying to buy more time, trying to use the same delay tactics we've seen before. And I hope, I'm sure a lot of Ukrainians here hope as well, that President Trump's going to see through those tactics and will not buy Putin's lies. He'll see those traps and he'll get them. He'll understand that. Well, we will see from the press conference that's going to happen, right? What's the climate, what's the attitude, the mood will be, whether he'll be satisfied. So that remains to be seen. But obviously for Putin, is a chance to again try to charm President Trump, try to win back his mind, not to antagonize with President Trump. So probably he'll try to do that.
Now, regardless of the makeup of the delegations and how senior or otherwise they may be, we are expecting that the main meeting itself will only be Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and their interpreters. How wise do you think that is for the principal to go in there only with an interpreter and no other diplomatic team as well?
It's difficult, to evaluate this from perspective wise or unwise. I know that, that's what President Trump and probably Putin think is the best. That's how they approach things. They believe in those personal contacts, and especially Donald Trump, right? So it doesn't surprise me that they wanted to meet one-on-one, face-to-face. How wise that is? I think that has to be determined by the teams of them. Obviously, we don't know what they'll discuss. But they had those one-on-one calls before. They spoke one-on-one before, right? Obviously, there are some dangers that something will be discussed. And obviously, that's a moment where Putin will probably try to convince President Trump of something or try to, apply his tactics or do something else. Again, depends on President Trump whether he sees through or not.
Now, a little bit, if we can, a little bit of Kremlinology. What signals, what signs should we be looking out for? What kind of body language, or who, if we see that they're close to Putin or Trump, if there's lots of shaking hands and backstabbing, what little signs should we look out for to tell us about how things are going or how it's viewed by the attendees?
I think it'll be interesting to see their first encounter on the tarmac, right? When they just meet each other, how they shake hands. Whether Trump wants to show strength with his firm handshake.
He always does that pulley thing, doesn't he? He kind of grabs the hand and then...
Yeah, we saw that before. Whether he'll try to do that with Putin as well or not. How Putin will behave next to President Trump. Obviously, we'll have to look for some compliments from Putin, maybe at the press conference or the spray, whether he compliments Donald Trump, compliments the United States, whether also he is in time for the meeting. We know that very often Vladimir Putin, when he accepts guests or when he visits other meetings, attends other meetings, he likes to be late, just do this power move. Is he going to do here in Alaska, American soil? I don't know, but I think there will be a lot of these things. Obviously, they're not as significant as the talks themselves or decisions, but it's always interesting to see that dynamics, on the personal level. Very often, those little moves, they set the tone for what's going to be next, what's going to be happening next. I remember very well when Volodymyr Zelensky came to the White House in February.
We all do.
Yes, when he walked out of the car, and first thing President Trump said to Zelensky, "Oh, I see you all dressed up." Obviously, Zelensky wasn't wearing a suit. And that played out later during the Oval Office meeting. We all remember that, right? Let's see what President Trump will be the first thing he says to Putin as well. How he greets him. Like, will there be any jokes? Will there be any, friendly approach? Gonna be, more firm and cold. It's gonna be very interesting.
And just finally, so beyond the rhetoric and beyond what may happen between the individuals, how is this received? How's this summit received by the Ukrainian diaspora here in the United States? Do people welcome that they are talking and there may be some inching towards a peace negotiation with all the caveats and the twists and turns? But I mean, is it welcome in any way? A lot of people we've spoken to don't welcome it at all. They see it all as a complete sham, and the only loser here being Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. So, what do you think the view is from the Ukrainian diaspora of this meeting going ahead?
Well, if you talk to Ukrainians in the US, I think most of them would be disappointed of having welcoming war criminal on the US soil. Obviously, most of them would love Vladimir Putin to be arrested the moment he steps on the US soil. And also, obviously, we all know that that's not going to happen, right? So I think Ukrainians are nervous about this meeting because they don't want to see concessions from the United States towards Russia. The White House says there are no concessions, and they want to come from the position of strength. And I see that's what Ukrainians would love to see as well, for President Trump to come from the position of strength and applying, after the meeting, meaningful pressure in Russia. Obviously, welcoming Putin on the US soil for Ukrainians who live here, that doesn't look good. But at the same time, Ukrainians want peace, I think, more than anyone. And if you look at the recent polls, most Ukrainians in Ukraine as well, they want some settled negotiation, end the war through negotiations. That doesn't mean that they're ready to cede their lands or do land swaps. Doesn't mean that they are ready to have any peace, especially with Russia's demands on Russia's conditions, right? I think Ukrainians here, and we saw it today, I think we'll see next 2 days.
Today at the rally.
Yeah, rally
here,
absolutely. The rally
that took place the day before the meeting.
Absolutely, right ahead of the meeting. And I think there will be rallies on the day of the meeting. They will try to convey to Putin that he is not welcomed here. That there are a lot of Ukrainians who live here, there are a lot of friends of Ukraine who live here, and they do not welcome Putin in Alaska. That's sad, that's the decision of the administration, right, to have a meeting here, to approach for the peace, and if something good comes out of it, if Ukrainians see more pressure on Russia after that, more arms for Ukraine, more support for Ukraine, I think they would be glad that meeting had some positive impact. But obviously having Putin on the US soil, I think it's even offensive for a lot of Ukrainians here.
Ostap, Yarysh, thank you so much for taking tea in the Telegraph Winnebago.
Thank you so much for having me here. This is me, and tea was terrific. Thank you.
Ha! Well, that's because I made it, not him.
Obviously.
Thank you.
Let's turn to our final thoughts now. Dom, do you want to relay to listeners how we're going to approach the summit itself? And I think you're going to get your revenge, aren't you? I've got a horrible feeling that I'm going to receive an early call from you.
Yes, in a delicious turn of irony, I will be waking you up at doggers o'clock tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, your time. So the plan is this, folks. We're expecting the press conference at 1500, 3 p.m. local time here in Alaska. So by the time that finishes, we think Donald Trump is going to be pretty swift up and away back to Washington, D.C. So probably around 1600, 4 p.m. local time here in Alaska. So 2300 hours Friday night, London time. So at that point, I will get a feel for what the news was, what the best line was, how to talk about the analysis of the Trump-Putin summit. I'm at that point going to wake you up, Francis. Let's say I ring you at 4 p.m. our time, which will be 0100 hours Saturday morning your time. We'll have a little chat about what we're going to do, how we're going to play it, what the big story was, and then we will record a special podcast. So this will be the very early hours, Saturday morning, London time. We will produce a podcast that will then be edited as normal, and that should be out. I don't know what time, but let's have a guess. It'll probably be about, let's say, 0600 Saturday morning, London time, which will be 9 p.m, 2100 hours, Friday night, Alaska time, local here. So early Saturday morning, European time, we should have a special podcast out from Connor and me here in Alaska with thoughts and analysis from you, Francis, in London. So that will be coming out in the early hours of Saturday morning, London time. I'm then also going to write a newsletter. So our weekly Ukraine, the latest newsletter. And folks, if you haven't signed up, please do so. Just go and have a look on the Telegraph website. Sign up to our weekly Ukraine, the latest newsletter. That normally comes out on a Friday afternoon, London time. We're delaying, obviously, for the big news of the week. So I'm going to top that. I'm going to write a piece, an analysis piece to go on that. That will be released in the early hours of Saturday, maybe, I think, probably more toward mid-morning, lunchtime, Saturday time in London. And then I've got to go and talk to the Canadian Broadcasting Company about the Winnebago. So it's all about priorities, I suppose. But that's how I see it panning out. If you want, Francis, I can just give you sort of regular half-hourly phone calls through the night just to make sure that you've got your best thinking cap on and that you're fresh for our interview. How does that sound?
I'll be honest, the thought of one late-night phone call from you is harrowing enough, let alone multiple ones. But Dom, I can't wait. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom, Nicholls and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.